Yep, that's fine. I can see Josh's presentation now.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Josh Sendall from Lancaster University now for his paper on library information and knowledge professionals as anti-racism advocates. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And this afternoon, you're going to join me on a journey that's led towards the formation of an anti-racism advocacy group. Now, I'll share personal insights and experiences and shine a light on the role, importance, and transformative potential of allyship. But more than anything this afternoon, I want to convey a simple message, and that is that the challenges may be significant, but we can achieve so much more when we work together. Now, the starting point on this journey was our 2018 Staff Away Day, the theme for which was EDI. We discussed the ways in which a more diverse workforce leads to better decision making, increased creativity, improved performance and efficiency, workforce satisfaction, fairness, greater flexibility, improved problem solving, and equal opportunities, and ultimately enabling us to recruit and retain the best on the basis of merit and to serve our student population. We discussed unconscious bias, which was framed as the way in which that prejudice is something that's involuntarily soaked up from the world around us and that can seep into our decision making and interactions with others, leading to scenarios where we unknowingly treat different people differently from different backgrounds. We learned that we can tackle unconscious bias through greater awareness and critical thinking. This started discussions about the ways in which bias, unconscious or otherwise, affects service delivery and working practices. And many of these constructive conversations led to positive projects and initiatives. However, where racial equity is concerned across the sector, progress has been slow. And in November 2019, I attended the Talent Untapped conference for BAME library staff at the University of East London, led by Regina Everett, who will deliver the keynote tomorrow. It was clear that this perception resonated with others at that event, an overriding sense that systems are broken and that the onus has been on us, the marginalised minority, to get things moving, alone and isolated as many of us are, often as the only BAME member of staff in our library. Now, I'm going to jump forwards in time now to the tumultuous summer of 2020, the coronavirus pandemic that revealed significant and persisting social, economic and health inequalities for people from BAME backgrounds, to the global consciousness that swelled in the wake of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of those who were sworn to protect and serve all US citizens, a renewed Black Lives Matter movement seeking to address the incontrovertible truth that a disproportionate number of Black people are killed at the hands of American police. Now, I'd like to address the phrase itself, Black Lives Matter. Now, at its core, it is an anti-racism movement, a rejection of overt, covert and systematic discrimination against Black people. It's a phrase that has at points been weaponized and turned on the movement as some responded with all lives matter. And on that, we agree, all lives should matter. Categorically, the phrase does not mean that only Black lives matter. It means that Black lives deserve the same protection afforded to everybody else. That parents who look like me should be able to hug their child in the morning and let them go out into the world in good faith that they'll return home that evening, with confidence that should any harm befall their child, the police will protect them, not profile them, not cut their life short. One of my key messages today is this. It's that instances of overt and covert racism occur every day right here in the UK. Racism is not unique to our transatlantic cousins. Now, while the spotlight was on the US last summer, I looked at publicly available data from the UK Home Office, which revealed significant and rising incidents of hate crime, with the Home Office acknowledging that Brexit had exacerbated growing tensions as politicians and media outlets deployed racist rhetoric and xenophobic sentiment to influence the campaign. In those moments, as the tight grasp of polarising identity politics gripped our communities, life got harder for people like me across the country. In the wake of the tumult and controversy, the media attention, the heated discourse that raged last summer, I felt for a moment paralysed and helpless. Because for me, it wasn't abstract. Like many Black and Asian minority ethnicity people, it was real and it was painful. The emotional burden was heavy as sections of society began to critically reflect on our past, present, and future. Now, distressing as it was, I wanted to do something to share the stories of young people living right here in the UK with the hope that it could just maybe make a small difference. So I delivered a talk as part of our library's midday seminar series. I introduced colleagues to Joe, Ash and Ollie as I'm introducing them to you now. Now, their names have been changed to protect identity, but what follows are accounts of some of their experiences growing up as BAM people here in the UK. Initially, Joe found it really frustrating, but they came to accept that people would, without permission, touch their hair. People they knew, people they didn't know, often without acknowledging them as a person. One day, Joe decided to ask their white friends how often they got stopped and searched by the police or pulled over while driving. To their surprise, their friend said that it really, or in some cases, it never happened. For Joe, it had become at least a monthly experience. Ash finished her shift at the restaurant and waited at the bus stop. After a few minutes, a car passed by. It slowed, but then continued on its journey. It reappeared a minute or so later with the windows down as the occupants shouted unrepeatable racist words and threw the remains of a takeaway at her. Ollie was learning to drive. He wanted to start looking for a car so he could get on the road as soon as he passed. After looking at a few cars at a showroom, he asked a friend who'd been driving for a couple of years if he'd test drive one for him. Now, they approached the salesman and asked. The salesman paused, he gestured at Ollie's two white friends and said, "Yeah, I'll take you two, but he'll have to wait here because he'll probably stick us up." The salesman laughed and headed off to get the keys. Ollie was mortified. He asked his friends if they could just leave. His friends insisted on making a complaint. Ollie hated all the fuss. He just wanted to disappear. At the end of his first class at college, Ollie was packing up. He was one of the last to leave. On his way out, he got talking to the tutor. The tutor asked Ollie what his parents did. Ollie explained his mum worked in an office, but his dad died when he was younger, but he'd been a pharmacist. The tutor grinned as he gestured the inverted commas sign with his hands and said, "Ah, you mean a street chemist, don't you?" Ollie never went back to that class. How could he? He dropped out of college not long after. Now, I need to apologise to you all for what you've just heard because I have misled you. Because all of those moments occurred in my life, and sadly many more before my 21st birthday. Moments that led to me dropping out of further education, moments that led to feelings of immense frustration, moments that shattered dreams, that destroyed my trust in justice, inequality of opportunity, and in the institutions that I should have been able to rely on. The truth is that before they ever arrive at university with their hopes, dreams and aspirations, our BAME students, our applicants, colleagues, those who may one day consider working with us, and members of the wider community are extremely likely to have experienced inequality, microaggressions, institutional, structural and overt racism. They then find themselves within a prestigious institution where they may feel out of place, where they don't see academics, particularly senior academic leaders or university leaders who look like them. People in leadership positions that really understand the challenges they face, the obstacles they've overcome just to get their foot in the door. And nationwide in libraries, the picture is markedly disproportionate, where 96.7% of staff identify as white. So within libraries, that's just 3.3% of staff from a BAME background compared to 14% in society at large. So what's the cumulative impact of all that I've outlined so far? Well, where library staff are concerned, it goes some way in explaining the distressing findings of the 2019 Sendall report on BAME staff experiences. And where our students are concerned, I'd argue that this context provides several pieces in the puzzle of understanding the 23.4% national attainment gap between white and black students qualifying with a first class or upper second class degree. So this draws to a close the first half of my paper, and the overriding message is this: it's that BAME people face a disproportionate, unfair uphill struggle, a struggle that's extremely difficult to articulate, to translate for those who don't have a direct personal experience. Now, we can't turn back the hands of time, but I'm going to move on now to discuss how progressive allyship and anti-racism advocacy is making a difference at Lancaster University Library and how it could at yours. So what does allyship mean in the context of an academic library? Well, put simply, it means white people actively supporting BAME people. It means recognising your privilege. And pausing for a minute to address that term, the privilege you enjoy is in having no direct experience of all the things that I've discussed today. It's in never having experienced overt or covert racism. Anti-racism allyship and advocacy is about addressing and dismantling systems or processes that perpetuate adverse outcomes for BAME people so that we can all move forwards together on level ground. Now, it's not passive, it's active, it's practical, and it has huge transformative potential. So what follows are instances of anti-racism allyship and advocacy that have taken place at Lancaster University during the last year. One such initiative, led by Caroline Gibson, who's one of our faculty librarians, involved purchasing and distributing 100 copies of Akala's book Natives to students and staff. And one of the wonderful things about this initiative is that the funding for it was crowdsourced by one of our part-time PhD students, a gentleman by the name of Douglas Booker. We then hosted a number of virtual reading groups for staff and students, which focused on the ideas in the book and our responses to them rather than an academic discussion. I think this area is also about making links and investing in relationships with groups across the university who are working in this space. And so we invited a PhD student, Irene, who's a member of the Lancaster University Race Equality Network, to a talk at an all-staff meeting in the library to introduce us to their action-focused anti-racism toolkit. Now, at that meeting, Paul Newnham, a faculty librarian and ally, made a pledge on behalf of the library to Irene to adopt and implement that toolkit, a pledge which was fully endorsed by our director, Andrew Barker, and the library management team. Paul put out a call for an anti-racism advocates group, and since then, a group of around 8 to 10 advocates and allies has met monthly. And our activities generally fall into one of these 4 areas: discussion and education, events and activity, policy, procedures and processes, and information and resources. We've also arranged anti-racism training to be delivered by Advance HE for our staff, because for us, anti-racism, racial equity and the decolonising movement are inextricably linked. We want to actively challenge and dismantle structures and systems that generate or perpetuate any sense that any race or indeed their knowledge and its manifestation is subaltern or inferior. We've held 3 staff discussion groups which explored Naga Munchetty's Let's Talk About Race Panorama documentary. The discussions have been rich and dynamic, and I think this is in no small part because Paul, who facilitated these discussions, created a safe space, a space where people could come along and talk and be vulnerable and risk getting it wrong, but to learn. And I'd say that sense of constructive dialogue in a safe space, that forms the bedrock upon which we can build a fairer future based on understanding and our shared humanity. And I think the encouraging thing has been the extent to which staff are now more comfortable talking about these issues, expressing their sadness, their disappointment, their anger, their hopes for a better future, and the actions that we can take as a library to get us there. We've also taken specific chapters of the anti-racist toolkit and began to implement their recommendations. For example, the library management team's unequivocal endorsement of the toolkit, or discussions we've been having within our teams about our services and practices, or the discussions that we've been having as managers with our staff during one-to-ones or as part of the PDR process. We've also been taking action to attract, recruit and retain staff from diverse backgrounds, and that means extending our reach to appeal to wider audiences, thereby increasing the likelihood that we'll attract diverse applicants. We, and I mean we need to promote our wonderful profession to people who wouldn't traditionally think of working in academic libraries, to ensure that we capture and retain graduate talent from our vibrant student populations. And I'd say therein lies another challenge that translates to the sector, both for professional services, but also for academia. And that's that we often recruit in our own image, which perpetuates and compounds inequalities. The real question is, are we ready to welcome ethnic and cultural diversity? That is to say, those who not only look different, but are different to our image of the ideal candidate. Our work to decolonise the collection is ongoing, and we'll hear more about those efforts in a talk that follows mine. But one example at Lancaster is our recent acquisition of ProQuest's African Diaspora and a number of texts that explore Lancaster's role in the transatlantic slave. Now, as I've said, our student communities are often vibrant and diverse. And for me, decolonisation of our collection will have been successful when the diversity of authored texts on our shelves begins to match the diversity of our student community.
Josh, can I just butt in and tell you you've got your 5-minute warning?
No problem, thank you. So over the last 5 years, and more recently the last 12 months, we've been connecting as a library with groups across the university involved in local heritage and local history. And we've been working really closely over the last year with the Lancaster Black History Group. And this has included opening up our local heritage, unique and distinctive collections, such as our Satterthwaite letterbook collections, which detail the activity of a prominent Lancaster mercantile family and their interests in the slave trade. And those letterbooks will be made publicly available via the Lancaster Digital Collections platform that Andrew touched on in his plenary earlier on. Now, this partnership with local community organisations is wonderful, bringing our collections to life, sharing in a journey of discovery, advancing knowledge, understanding, and acknowledging the truth, the whole truth of how the city of Lancaster came to be a prominent, wealthy Georgian port. Now, as I draw to a close, I want to jump back in time for just a moment. This is the slide that I finished with when I shared my story with the library last summer. And reflecting back, it captures so much, because I felt isolated, I felt alone, I felt to some extent hopeless and helpless, unable to affect change or lead us in the direction that we needed to head in order to become the inclusive and diverse library that I wanted us to be, at the very heart of the university community, at the heart of our local and regional communities. This is my experience now. I'm supported by colleagues. I'm not alone at all. I'm part of a group, and together in a few small months, we've achieved so much that I couldn't have hoped to have achieved alone. So much positive and progressive action that wouldn't have been possible without the power of allyship. So don't for a moment underestimate the importance of allyship. Don't lose sight of the truth that small steps can move us forwards, whether it's that book group, whether it's work to decolonise the collection, whether it's promoting our profession far and wide. It matters, it makes a difference. And if you'd like to learn more about allyship, then there's still time to sign up to the Sconnell Bain Group's inaugural Allies Forum next week, and you'll find details about that pinned to a tweet on my Twitter profile. I'll close with this message. We need your allyship, and fundamentally, allyship means being a good friend. And a good friend doesn't just tell you that they're a good friend and then stand by as you struggle. A good friend, a true friend, is really there for you. That's the essence of allyship, and that's everything. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Josh. That was amazing. Can I just open up the floor to any questions for Josh, please? Can you put your hand up if you've got anything you'd like to hear in a bit more detail? Sure, loads of people are just still taking it all in. Okay, Kaye's got a question for you.
Hi, Kaye, fire away.
Okay, do you want to turn your microphone on?
Tell you what, I'll put my camera on as well. that infamous thing that we all do in Teams.
Yeah.
Sorry, I haven't got a question. I just wanted to say thank you for being so open and honest and sharing that with us, Josh. I think that's sort of been given us a real insight. And I liked your kind of explanation around white privilege as well, because that's one that trips people up a lot. So that was really useful. And I'm excited about what's happening at Lancaster. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, Kaye. Thanks for that feedback. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. I think Sheila's next. She's got a question.
Hi, Josh. Brilliant presentation. I'm mainly saying thank you as well, but also as well, I'd like to say it's so disappointing, isn't it, that it's left to the tiny underrepresented amount of BAME colleagues we've got to raise this issue every time. And so the allyships thing is something that, because it's something that we can have as a more constructive forward-going thing that goes on regardless, is something I'd really like to delve into. I shall probably be emailing you, Josh. You've given yourself a lot of work with this one. Okay.
Thank you, Sheila. You're very welcome to get in touch. And I think the reality is, you know, having worked in libraries for a number of years, I've got such wonderful colleagues and have done, and that continues. And I think part of the challenge is the complexity of this area. People have a sense that they want to help, they want to get involved, but they're not always too sure how. And so I think creating those safe spaces, as I mentioned, that's really important, to say, you know, it's okay to get it wrong, it's okay to come along with good intentions and to put those good intentions to work. So it is challenging, but I think, you know, that message, that allyship, that being a good friend is really at the core of what we're talking about here. You know, it's really key. We're all human beings, so, you know, let's have a little bit of compassion and care for one another and help each other out.
Definitely. Thanks, Josh.
You're very welcome.
We've got another question from Claire Williams.
Hi, Josh. Thank you again. I was interested to know, did you get academic engagement with the ProQuest African Diaspora Collection, and have you had any other initiatives such as that one?
I guess, yeah, I mean, every university is unique. I would say at Lancaster, there's quite a lot of decolonising activity that's happening out in the faculties, in particular in our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. There's quite an active group there. So our engagement with academic departments in that faculty is really strong. And we have had some engagement, but I think there's also a role for us when we get past acquisition and procurement to think about how we promote text and have conversations with academics about diverse texts and getting them embedded within reading lists and, you know, involved in part of the course. So I think engagement, it definitely works both ways. We're fortunate at Lancaster because we have that engagement from academic staff, but we also do some of the legwork in terms of promoting the resources that we get hold of. So I think, yeah, that's probably what I'd say on that topic, is the kind of two-way nature of engagement.
Thank you. I might be in touch about that, because everybody professes interest, but when it gets them to, well, when it comes to getting them to change the books on the reading lists, that proves a bit more tricky, I'm afraid. But
yes, it can be the case. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And I think engagement with students' unions can be quite helpful in terms of raising the profile and importance of this, and that sense that our key stakeholders at universities, you know, our students, want to see these changes as well. But please do get in touch. I'd love to talk more.
Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. We've got a couple more minutes for questions. I think Liam Bullingham, you're next.
Hi, Josh. Fantastic talk, and thanks so much for that and sharing that. It's just, well, our cameras off early. I was welling up hearing what you've had to go through. I was really, really proud that you shared that. Anyway, I want to ask you about what you think about pipelines for bringing more diversity into the profession. I noticed that the King's Trust had just announced a post of a graduate trainee, a positive action, a graduate trainee aiming specifically at bringing people into the sector from ethnic minorities. Do you think, can you imagine this happening in HE soon? Because I really want to help that happen in HE.
Yeah, and it can be a contentious area, and it can be quite divisive as well. I think there comes a point where, you know, as a sector, you've really got to be critically self-reflective, recognise and acknowledge that first there is a gap, there's a disparity, and that's clear in HE. It's very clear in academic libraries as well. And if you're going to bring about change, then you know, often it's the case that you're going to have to do something differently. It comes from that old phrase, if you want something you've never had, you're going to have to do something you've never done. I don't know whether it's the right thing to do. I do know it's time for us as a sector to start having those conversations. But I think what I can say is that I have seen instances of traineeships within academic libraries posted and directed towards people from BAME backgrounds that are advertised with an inclusive message that, you know, we would like to attract from BAME communities because we're underrepresented in these areas. That's an important message, but I think that message can be warmer. You can paint a true inclusive picture of your institution, and if you take a real clear and strong welcoming message like that and couple it with something like a targeted traineeship, then perhaps that's one of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that right now lies kind of scattered over the table. So I think I'd like to talk more about it, really, Liam, is I guess my answer to that question at this point in time. It's worked for other sectors. I don't see why it couldn't work for us.
Sure, thank you.
Can we just squeeze one last question in, because we are at time really, but Emma, is yours just a brief question?
Make it brief. Thank you so much, Josh. At Salford, I'm thinking about this idea of allyship and how we take allyship as part of our relationship with students, and we put that at the heart of our relationship with students. So the quick version of the question would be, are there any particular resources or strategies that are a really good way to start that kind of development process almost for our staff, that we can move into that space of kind of adopting that allyship with our students?
Yeah, what I would say actually is I probably wouldn't point you towards a resource per se. I mean, I guess I am, in the sense that I would recommend having a discussion group, a long table kind of discussion around something like Is Uni Racist, the BBC documentary, for example, or around Nagam and Chetty's Panorama documentary. Make sure that you create that safe space. And I know Paul at Lancaster would be happy to talk about how he's done that for our staff, and to start having those conversations when you can bring people to the table in that safe environment. People realise that there is an accord, there is a sense that they want to get involved, and you can start to take it from there. I think the anti-racism toolkit that Lou Wren offer at Lancaster is really good as well. So I'll point you towards that afterwards too.
Lovely. Thank you, Josh.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And thanks again, Josh. We're going to move us on now to our second paper, which is by Kaye Towlson from Montfort University, and she's going to talk about working towards decolonising the reading list. Thanks, Kaye.
Thank you. While I'm getting my presentation up, I was just going to say at Montfort University, we have actually got a library traineeship, which we started this year, and it is funded through the Decolonising DMU project. And if anybody wants to ask me any questions via email or anything about that, I'm quite happy to answer those.
Great. Thanks, Kaye.
Okay, just bear with me. Might be stuck in this kind of mode because my can you see the slides? I know they're not in slideshow mode.
Yeah, we can see the slides.
And now it should go into slideshow mode. Brilliant. Okay, it's worked. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you about this afternoon, as Nikki's already said, is the work that we've been doing at Montfort University, working towards decolonising the reading list. I'm Kaye Towlson. I'm one of the academic team managers there, and I'm also the Fair Outcomes Champion, which means I head up the library work stream for decolonising DMU. I also wanted to sort of say something that decolonising the reading list and decolonising work really does chime with this theme of the conference, which is new beginnings and aspirations and optimism for the future. So decolonising DMU seeks to create an anti-racist university where all can succeed. And actually decolonising the reading lists really does seek to better reflect the university's learning community as a whole, enable students, and that's all students, to connect with the curriculum and feel a sense of belonging within the classroom and the institution as a whole. And I know this is something that Josh was talking about earlier. So hopefully in terms of kind of session takeaways, we can say that we're looking at sharing the knowledge of the approach taken. I'll say a few words about achievements and challenges that have been experienced, give you an awareness of the tools that we offer to both academics for use within the classroom, to prompt discussion, reveal bias or lack of diversity, and to aid co-creation. So the shape of the session will look like this. I'm going to say a few words about what is decolonising and why is it necessary. How do we decolonise a reading list? Talk about the DDMU approach. So talk about the workshop tools and the fact that we offer a safe forum for discussion. The importance of co-creation, a few words around issues and barriers, and obviously then there's chance for questions. So decolonising DMU is a university strategic project that's been running now for nearly 2 years, and it was built on the work of a previous project which started around about 2017, which focused very much on the curriculum really, because it was called Freedom to Achieve, and it was very much about working towards definitely the reduction with the ultimate aim to eradicate the awarding gap experienced by students of colour in comparison with white students. And that work that we took within Freedom to Achieve, it became very apparent that we needed to look way beyond the curriculum. We needed to look all the way across all of the university systems. We need to address those systems, processes, and the structure of the university, and look to develop an anti-racist university. Other things that have kind of emerged through the project is very much, it's a process and a journey. I'm now thinking of Josh's steps at the moment, and that is very much, it's about, you know, it's incremental steps taken over a period of time to make a really big impact. If you're interested in the project as a whole, then the website address is there, and then the other URL there is the library's Decolonising DMU guide, which will give links to the tools that I mentioned, also some kind of resources and, well, useful resources, useful links in there as well. So by all means, have a look there. We chose to call the project Decolonising DMU intentionally because we felt it very much reflected what we were doing. And I'm aware that the term decolonising is becoming a bit of a Marmite term as we go forward. Some people find it quite traumatic because of the history and they don't really want that link. And then others think, well, it really does describe exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. And when we started out, we came up with a working definition, because obviously people will say, what do you mean by decolonising? And sometimes it is a complex issue. It's not that easy to do a little sound bite. So this is the whole working definition, but I just wanted to pull a couple of pieces out of that. So decolonising DMU stretches far beyond the curriculum. It acknowledges that the scale of the challenge runs deep into examining the everyday norms of university life, and we will require all DMU staff and students to acknowledge, identify, discuss, and seek to understand the issues. And then further down, in seeking to decolonise, we are creating an anti-racist university which allows all to succeed and which celebrates the rich diversity and heritage of DMU. And that is truly what we are about. So decolonising the reading lists, why do we need to do that? We all know that the decolonising movement in HE has been gaining momentum and an increasingly high profile over probably about the last 4 or 5 years. It did get an increasing push with the traumatic murder of George Floyd last year, but it's probably one movements that you've probably heard of are things like Why is my curriculum white, which I think is a UCL initiative. Why isn't my professor black, I think it should say, and Roads Must Fall are all initiatives that have been in place for quite a while now. And they all call for a move away from completely Eurocentric West Northern Hemisphere focused curriculum. with the idea that this will enable students to explore and reference different cultural histories and narratives in their work, to see themselves reflected in the curriculum, and that's everybody, and for all to see themselves as a valued member of the academy and a valued voice within that academy, to feel that connection, belonging, sense of identity and of visibility within that world that they're operating within, and that's really crucial for achievement. So what is a decolonising reading list? It's anti-racist, it's diverse in composition, and it needs to be culturally aware. The idea is it represents the whole of the academic community. It should facilitate student engagement, engender a sense of belonging and connectedness, and afford more effective learning. Before we move on to sort of like the tools and the approach taken at DMU, I just wanted to pull out a couple of things around anti-racist pedagogy, because we talk about it, but I thought if I sort of flashed up a couple of definitions, at least we've got a bit of underpinning then. The term anti-racist pedagogy, Blakeney says, is located within critical theory, and it was used to explain and counteract the persistence and impact of racism. And essentially, anti-racist pedagogy allows for the consideration of perspectives of others within their current context. And that in turn creates a broad knowledge base of others and identifies common interests, which is indicative of democratic citizenry. It's transformative, and it can transform reality based on the expanded shared knowledge base and the current conditions. So it's kind of grounded as well in the contemporary situation. An anti-racist pedagogy for teachers might begin with dialogue surrounding the dynamics of white social dominance. And Catherine Blakeney also suggested children's literature as a really good vehicle for those kind of discussions. And we have done some work around that at the library at Montfort University. We've worked with Laila Rashid, who's one of our Royal Literary Fund Fellows. And it is actually quite telling, and it's found, it seemed to me that it's a very good vehicle to kind of particularly get white colleagues to see the kind of paucity of characters of colour, heroes of colour within children's literature, thinking about what they grow up with, thinking about how it would feel if you didn't have your literary heroes, that you didn't have those kind of roles played out in literature that could, you know, inspire your imagination and your aspirations. So that's something you might want to have a think about. Kishimoto, and I don't want to labour this too much, but this just offers a kind of a little bit more insight into anti-racist pedagogy, specifies that it's not simply about incorporating racial content into courses, curriculum and discipline, but it's also about how one teaches, even in course where race is not the subject matter. And he argues that faculty need to be aware of their social position. So it's a bit around your own kind of social and personal awareness. There's something in research now around positionality, which gives an insight into where you're coming from and how that then means that you might interpret or implement research and research results. And he talks about this continual critical self-reflection in order to effectively implement anti-racist pedagogy. So it's an ongoing and intentional approach. He specifies 3 components. So the need to incorporate topics of race and inequality into course content, teaching from that anti-racist pedagogical approach, but also talks about grounding it within the local community and the lived experience. So looking at anti-racist organising within the campus and linking efforts to the surrounding community. So that's all kind of food for thought. So to talk about the DMU approach and that of decolonising DMU in terms of decolonising the reading list. A central approach that I have taken has been one of sharing tools with academics to facilitate the analysis of reading lists, to help check for bias and diversity, and to adopt a co-creative approach and perhaps an audit approach. So I developed a workshop that offers the tools and the safe, and very much a safe space, to consider the pedagogic purpose of reading lists, plus the need and impact of decolonising those lists, and to start delivering it out across the institution. This workshop has also been embedded within the curriculum of the Postgraduate Certificate of Academic Practice at DMU, which is taken by all teaching staff. And the work seeks to both interest and empower academics to work together with their colleagues, students and librarians to decolonise and diversify reading lists. It's a safe space to share discussion and experience, and it's been delivered to the librarians in the first instance, so they knew what I was doing, and then across the faculties. And the academics that attend the workshops, it is self-selective. I would just like to say. And the subject librarian, if I go to a particular faculty or for a particular programme, the subject librarian will go along as well. So the subject liaison librarians are all advocates for decolonising. So they offer support in this. They don't have all the answers. So it seems very much that it's a joint venture between faculty and library. So just to share a few tools with you. And one that I do use, and if you do decide to implement this, Kelly Stockdale and Rowan Sweeney, who created it, would be interested to hear from you if you do actually implement it. And this was something they delivered within the field of criminology and also in computing. And it's just very simple. They originally did it as just a flip chart and post-it notes. And as you can see from there, you've got that matrix. So they suggested students identified, say, up to 10 key theorists, and then they just wrote their names on a post-it note and stuck it in the box that was appropriate. And you instantly get that visual to see, you know, is there a bias? Where is the bias? I suspect it will be mainly in the male white box. And why is that? And what impact does that have? So it's a real conversation kickstarter. And that's had a really positive response from academics attending the various workshops that I've delivered. Other things that I mention are the Kent University reading list review. So that was both desk-based and focus groups were actually run as well. So staff and students explored reading lists, reviewed their contents, concepts and the programme context, and looked for representation. Similarly, there's been audit analysis performed as well in other areas. So University of Arts London, they have engaged in a programme whereby they had tutors, librarians and students, and they paid their students. And they did an audit and review of reading lists, again looking at a balance, and they tasked them with trying to produce a reimagined list. And they did this across 10 programmes. They got 4 completed audits and a new list. And they very much said that they saw this as an opportunity not to replace, but to reflect and amplify new narratives within the course. Similarly, Manchester Met, they came up with an auditing system, did it across 18 modules. They discovered, as you probably would expect, authors of colour were represented by just over 10% of the reading list content. 71% of the materials came from established traditional publishers, compared with 65% of authors were male. So what they actually used was just quite a simple spreadsheet, and then what they did was they offered it to the different faculties and said if their faculties engaged with it, they could actually tell the library the actual results, which I thought was quite good. They said that they found it empowering but time consuming, as audit work usually is, and difficulty around subjective judgment of ethnicity, depending on what information is available and what you're using to base that judgment on. University Arts London have come up with a guideline for decolonising the reading list, and I personally think it's quite a sensible and practical set of guidelines, and I do share this in the workshop. So it talks about anything from looking at dominant voices, where those voices come from, as basically, is there anything from the Southern Hemisphere on your reading list, or does it just kind of show that predominance of the Western and global Northern canon? What voices do you exclude? What relevance is the author's identity? Is it all in the English language? Some in translation? What does that imply? What implications does that have? And where was material published? So it's all food for thought. I just wanted to quickly share with you a couple of things, and I am aware of time. So one of the big things around talking about decolonising reading lists is that you're probably then saying, you may end up looking at material that's perhaps not the traditional sort of peer-reviewed journals. And I'm not saying that there isn't material in peer-reviewed journals by researchers and academics of colour, because there definitely is, but obviously it's still a predominantly white space. So we suggest things like documentaries and films, so things like Canopy, Art Films Digital, Box of Broadcasts, Flag up things like YouTube, TED Talks, LinkedIn Learning. At DMU, our open access journals are now available from around the globe. So that includes material that is not in the English language. Blogs, podcasts and websites. We talk about co-creation, maybe asking students to help annotate materials. And then not last but least archives and special collections. And we've also bought various specific materials and collections for the library collection. So things like EDI, ebook platform, 20th century Black freedom struggles, history of that kind of thing. So really,
Kaye,
we're asking them to...
Can I just give you a 5-minute warning, Kaye?
You can, thank you. So really, we're asking them to start exploring new territories and think in new and different ways. So as I've just said, that may fly in the face of traditional information hierarchies and authority, and you might want to pause and reflect on potential colonial legacies in knowledge production there. Start thinking about co-creation, not only with their students, but perhaps with their colleagues, getting colleagues to be a critical friend of their reading lists, working together, student annotated or co-created reading lists, lots of different strands of approaches. So also involves us looking at our collection and promoting various parts of our collection. And we too have done book displays. And I think Josh mentioned this, or it might have been Andrew, that actually it's quite surprising what kind of amount of positive feedback you get for having, we had before COVID, an ongoing display of books that were often had a central theme, but were by authors of colour. And we had an awful lot of positive comments about that. Just wanted to say approach and fears around decolonising the reading list. And this is a bit of a facetious comment, but I think quite often we librarians think we have to know the answer, or we should know the answer. And when I started working in this area, I kind of lived in fear of, you know, this expectation that I would automatically be able to produce a decolonised reading list for someone, which blatantly I can't. It's an ongoing project. It's an ongoing piece of work, seeking to become part of our business as usual. So that's why we call it decolonising, not decolonised. Nobody really knows exactly what the end product would look like. Worryingly, I have seen on the Sendall chat, I know some universities are now even being asked for metrics around diverse books on their collection lists, which great, gives you a sense of progress, but it can be very problematic to accumulate that data, very time intensive, might be mission impossible. Does this outweigh the benefits? But that's again food for thought. So the actual approach at DMU has been very much around of having that workshop with practical hints, tips and tools, making it a shared responsibility that can be an inclusive experience as academics, students and librarians can work together. And yes, it's an incremental approach. And then just briefly some barriers that potential issues and barriers. We're very aware that there are sensitivities around decolonising and racial inequalities. They're very sensitive subjects to discuss. So very much so that safe space and listening are essential. You come across blindness to the situation, resistance as individuals find it hard or refuse to take on board disparities of experience, award, representation, difficulties taking on board concepts like white privilege, colonial legacies and education leading to inequalities. Language can be a barrier, and I agreed and liked very much what Josh was saying about, you know, you may get it wrong. Part of the work, if you like, in inverted colours, and part of this area is being prepared in a way to get it wrong, to find out how you get it right. So finding the right language to express and discuss experience and concepts. And also remembering that language can also be a barrier to learning within the curriculum, as most materials favour those whose primary language is English. And that is not only an issue for our international students, there are an awful lot of home students whose first language is not English. It may actually be their third or fourth language. Decolonising is often seen as a threat to the canon, and we have to stress that it's about broadening and enhancing. Barriers, yes, money, staff, time. I'd also add energy, you know, getting that stock and other resources, generating that knowledge and awareness of the need to change and what is required. There is a fear about what is decolonising. It's difficult to define, and it seems to be an evolving and active concept. So librarians, I think, fear being seen not to know or being unable to supply the right resources. And I think we need to be honest and work together. And I think last but not least, trust is at the centre of what we do here. So people need to trust in the process, not feel threatened or challenged by it. And people then need to be able to see themselves that they can trust libraries, trust the collections that they have, and to feel that they very much belong. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kaye. That was great. I can see there's comments coming in already and rounds of applause and things. Brilliant. We've got a question straight away as well from Alison. Want to go ahead, Alison?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Kaye. That was a really interesting talk. Very, very interesting. Can I just ask, you mentioned that with your workshops, academics self-select to attend.
Yes.
What's the engagement been like, and have you got any tips around engaging academics?
That's always a good one, engagement. I would say we have, on average, I usually get about 12 come along. I think the most I've had is probably about 18. I think, to a sense, you don't want many more than that, because it then becomes beyond a safe space. So they have to feel comfortable. So actually, for example, I did some work with the Leicester Media School only yesterday. And great, it was actually at their request, so that was brilliant. And I think I had about 14 people come along, and they were all really keen, and the big discussions around reading lists and the pedagogy, and then about making them accessible for everybody, and that whole sort of belonging and reflection and importance. And the way that I've done it, I mean, I suppose I've been running them now for just over a year. I've actually delivered at least one workshop in each of the 4 faculties, and have started now to do work with programs, done some work with the librarians so that they know what I'm doing. And I think and have done part of it as part of like a promotional program around resource lists and reading lists, and then we offer decolonising lists as well. So I think the smallest workshop I've run is about 4, which is still enough. So I think if people have turn up, obviously if I just got one person, then I'd just talk to them. But I think in sense of engagement, yes, it really helps if you get, say, the program leader, or one of the venues I went to was in the Health and Life Sciences faculty. They have a session called was it Tips, Treats and Tricks or something, but it's like a teaching sharing thing, and they actually invited me along. So it's a nice space to go, and you've sort of got that audience. So perhaps look out for those kind of things, but also don't be afraid just to kind of put it out there and offer it, and treat it as a learning curve as well, for yourself. So
okay, thanks very much, Kaye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Has anybody else got any questions for Kaye? I can see people are commenting as well, Kaye, that they very much enjoyed it, and lots of informative insights to take away.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I'll just double check again that we haven't got any others. I think that's it then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure everybody will join me in thanking Josh and Kaye for 2 really fantastic presentations. Lots to think about. Got a nice break coming up now. An opportunity, if you want to go to our networking area, chat and cake. It's got to be about cake, hasn't it? Don't forget to get involved with the sponsors if you can do as well. We've got a treasure hunt with some prizes if you can find everything in the sponsor pages. And our gold sponsor, Adam Matthew Digital, will be speaking at 4:15 for 15 minutes. Thank you for attending this parallel session, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.